Let's turn now to page 82, please. We're in the 6th chapter, and we are dealing here with the 9th step. We're reaching toward the end of the 9th step. We're going to be commencing tonight in the second full paragraph on page 82. Before we get into that, however, let's remind ourselves of what we have learned so far about this step. It commences back on page 76, and I think it's probably the longest step in terms of the text in the big book. Maybe chapter 7 a little longer, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. One of the things that we learned with this step is that, first of all, that it is utterly necessary for us to make amends. We don't have a choice about that. Well, we do. We can choose not to do it, in which case we put ourselves in mortal jeopardy, because we will not be freed from the obsession, compulsion to drink alcohol. We have to do this. And this business of making amends is something very ancient. It goes back as far as we can trace the developments of various religious and philosophical movements all the way back. It's always been recognized that one of the prime ingredients of any kind of spiritual health is that we must stay free of our guilt. And that's what the 9th step is all about. The 9th step is there for us to be freed from our guilt, remorse, and shame. And you would think, well, how do we do that if all we have to do is make amends for the harm done? Well, I don't know exactly what the spiritual dynamics are. I guess probably none of us do, because we didn't make them up. But we do know from experience this is what does happen. That when we are willing to examine our past lives, and on a daily basis as we go through the rest of our life to see where we have caused harm to others, we must likewise be willing to set matters straight where we can. Remember, there are some general rules that we have to follow. First of all, that we do not ever criticize the other person when we're making amends. We do not call to mind the things which they may have done. We stick to our side of the street. We clean up our side of the street. And we do not criticize or make them wrong. By the way, there's an extension of that. Every time we make somebody else wrong, we're wrong. You might want to think about that. If I'm making you wrong, and I have, I think, great motives because in making you wrong, I'm going to help you. Not likely. The wall comes down right away. You stop listening, you get mad. What I've done instead of helping you is I've demeaned myself, because what I'm really saying is, if you're wrong, I have to be right. And so I'm going to feel good at your expense. We may think we have the best of motives, but unless we have permission to correct somebody else, they're not going to be listening. They may pretend to listen. They may make all kinds of movements and grunting noises in the direction of listening, but the truth of the matter is, if they haven't given us permission to be critical of them and correct them, we are going to accomplish nothing but negativity. And so here in our making amends, we do not make the other people wrong. It's irrelevant what they may have done. The amends are not for them. The amends are for us. And they are for us in this sense, that when we make amends, we are setting ourselves free from our guilt. Now, why is that important? Why is that critical? We always have to go back to basics. What is the basic thing that we're dealing with here? We come in the doors in a state of denial, in a state of resentment, rebellion, defiance, spiritual bankruptcy, and we're going to continue to be so and to get worse and worse until and unless we stop drinking. The basic fact is we cannot stop drinking on our own. we're powerless. Those who may be from outside of the program, or people who may not have experienced this for themselves, may not understand the idea of powerlessness. But that's the basic premise of AA, is that the lack of power is our problem. Not being bad people, not having no willpower, but being sick people. And we're sick in many ways. Usually we've had enough to drink that we become sick physically. Clearly we are sick spiritually, and oftentimes sick mentally as well. But down to the bottom line is simply this: unless we stop drinking, we die. Because alcoholism is a fatal, incurable, progressive illness. And we have to stop if we are to live. But we can't stop because we're alcoholics. The real alcoholic is dealing with an obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol over which he or she has no power. So as a result of that, the only way that we have to recover is we have to put God between us and the booze. To do that, we have to take certain very strong steps in the direction of spiritual growth. We have to be free of the things in ourselves which block us off from God. What are those things? In very rough terms, defects of character. Those are the insanities. And guilt. You see, we are as much blocked off from God by our guilt as we are by our defects. Well, naturally then, in order for us to recover, we have to be free of guilt, don't we? So the ninth step is that step which allows us to do that. Another basic tenet of the ninth step is that we do nothing in making amends to harm another person. We are not to harm the person that we're making amends to, nor are we to harm a third person who may be caught up in the same drama. We're not permitted to do that. Now, this particular principle also holds true for the rest of our lives. We're not permitted to harm another person, period. And we're not permitted to allow another person to harm us, because when we're being harmed, we're being blocked off from God. Another basic principle we're dealing with here is that some amends may take a lifetime. Where it involves family, we may be spending the rest of our lives restoring faith and trust and confidence in us. It may take that long. We don't know until we start. Whatever it takes, we have to be willing to do. But the most important of all of the tenets of the amends of the ninth step is that we will be relieved of our guilt if we are willing to make amends, because there are some amends we can never make. It would be crazy otherwise, because we would be blocked right here at the ninth step if there was not some sort of a spiritual, I don't know what you might call a stopcock. Something that allows us to be freed from our guilt, even though we can't make amends for one reason or another. And that's very simply what this is. The requirement is that we be willing. And of course, if we're not willing, we ask God for the willingness until it comes. Now, in light of all that, there are 5 basic sections in the ninth step, or categories, if you will, of amends, and they're all laid out in the big book. And in brief, these 5 categories are that we must, and the big book instructs us to do this first. We must make amends to the people we once hated. So that hatred has got to be dissolved. It's got to go away. And that's a tough amends to make, because quite often the person we hated us right back. And we know that there's great enmity there. There's likely to be a substantial confrontation, and we were afraid of confrontation. We don't like it, so we will shy away from that amends. The second category of amends is financial amends. And then we make amends where we have committed crime. And we make amends where we have been unfaithful. to our commitments, especially in our marital situation or where we have made commitments in a relationship to be faithful, and we've been unfaithful. These are tough ones because in many cases we cannot reveal very much because there will almost always be a third party involved. And finally, the last class of amends is what we're looking at tonight. This has to do with making amends to family.
Perhaps there's some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each night, pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we're dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk of face-to-face combat. It's important to note this business of jealousy. Jealousy is the product of overriding fear, the fear of loss, the fear of rejection, the fear of being shut out, the fear of loneliness, many, many fears that are involved with jealousy. And as the big book said, it's the most terrible human emotion. Also notice that we are instructed to pray, keeping always the other person's happiness upmost in mind. This is the kind of prayer that when we do our 11-step inventory, we can truthfully say that we have been trying to put back into the stream of life rather than take from it, and that we have had in mind what we can do to be helpful to others.
And again, it's important to understand that amends to family may go on and on. In fact, probably ought to. Let's keep in mind what damage we've done to family. Keep in mind that we owe a great deal in terms of our love and affection, in terms of our being honest and selfless, in terms of all of the things that we never did before. We get a chance to do them now. We get a chance to be a real person, to grow up, to take responsibility for our lives. Take responsibility to be people who live up to their commitments. To become people who can be known for their integrity. And we get to do this with our families. Page 82, second full paragraph. If we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Now, Bill should have added there right after the word sober, balderdash. Certainly we must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he has so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. Parenthetically, I'd like to comment a little bit on this business of the only thing that's necessary is to be sober. How many times have we heard people say, well, you had some problems today, but did you have a drink? No. Well, then you had a good day. Really? I thought it was a terrible day. You're telling me it's a good day. Of course, it wasn't your day, was it? So it's easy for you to say. The implication being that so long as we don't take a drink, everything is fine. I hear people say all the time that as soon as you stop drinking, everything gets better. Well, I suppose that that's a true statement in many ways. Obviously, when we're not drunk, we're going to more likely to take care of business and do the right thing than we were when we were drunk all the time. Well, what about this business of spiritual growth? And what about this business of carrying the message? What about this business of being of maximum service to God and the people about us? What about this business of walking around all the damn time in untreated alcoholism? That's no fun. Nobody wants to be in those shoes. Sobriety is just where we start. Where we start. From there on is a matter of spiritual growth. Expanding our spiritual base. Working and self-sacrificing for others. Being set free. Having some happiness and security and serenity in our lives. Having a purpose in life. How many people that you know have a purpose in their lives? Have any idea why in the world they're even here? Outside of survival and seeking as much pleasure as possible. You're born, life's a bitch, and you die, so what? But it's not so with us, is it, guys? We got a purpose. We know why we're here. We know that it was God's will that we're here. We know that it's His will that we be of maximum service to Him and our fellows. We know it's His will that we stay close to Him and perform His work well. And we know that when we do that, He gives us everything we need. Obviously not everything we want, but it's a very strange phenomenon, you know. When we get what we need, we invariably find it's just what we wanted all along. We didn't have brains enough to know what it was we wanted. And so when we talk about sobriety being enough, I feel sorry for people who think that's true and who will do nothing more than to hang on to sobriety because they're missing all of life. They're missing the whole thing. It's just exactly the same as love is not enough. You say, how many times you heard somebody who's being beaten up and smashed around and had a terrible life and they've gone back and back and back to somebody like that, and then they say, but I love him. As if somehow or another that answers it all. It doesn't. You know, it's interesting when we look at it, because love is not a state of mind. The only love that's worth a damn is loving action. Until we put love into action, there's no love at all. It's exactly the same as what we've learned about faith. That faith without works is dead. There's no faith without trusting. If I say I've got all this faith, and then you look at me and I'm running around dealing with my whole life with nothing but fear. I got a little sign on my office wall, put up there by my partner. Marilyn gets to see it every day. What would you do if you weren't afraid? I think about that. Fear is our enemy, tears us apart. Fear is probably our only enemy. If there is a devil, his name is fear. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Maybe some of you might want to think about that tonight. What would I be doing tomorrow if I weren't afraid? What would I have done today if I weren't afraid? And of course, you see, we know now, don't we, that fear is defeated by faith. Fear and faith can't live in the same house. But our faith has to grow, and it only grows because we work for it. Because we're willing to take leaps of faith. Because we're willing to experience God working in our lives. And because when we do that, we find out that God does what He says He's going to do. That He is faithful. And we come to trust Him. And when we begin to trust God, we begin to experience faith. And when that faith becomes strong enough, we'll almost never have fear anymore. What a way to live, I'm telling you. Let's go on page 62. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Mo. Ain't it grand? The wind stopped blowing." Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. Remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. Please notice that the Big Book uses meditation 7 different times, always in the sense of, well, you do meditate, don't you? Never does it seem necessary in the book to go into some long dissertation or explanation of meditation. Certainly it never mentions the necessity of attending ashram on a regular basis, or sitting in some yoga position, or saying Om, or having any kinds of crystals, or somebody in a long saffron robe leading the meditation. No gongs, no music. It just says meditate. What does that mean? It means to listen. Listen. If I'm going to pray to God and then I'm not willing to listen to the answer, what's wrong with me? This is the position the Big Book takes. Of course you meditate. Prayer and meditation go together. They're not separate. They're all part and parcel of the same thing. Second full paragraph on page 83. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Now that's pure 12-step, isn't it? That having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And that is, quite literally, the way we live the spiritual life. We've talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating. Until the 12 steps were written out, we really didn't have a guide for how to live a spiritual way of life. We knew the way we were supposed to be. We knew the kinds of thoughts we were to have. We knew the kind of life we were supposed to live, but we didn't know how to do it. We had some vague ideas. We tried to be good, tried to have good motives. We tried to do good. But until the steps came along, these spiritual principles, which everybody accepted as being true, were sitting out there in a kind of limbo, because it was one thing to enunciate how we're supposed to be, but it's quite another thing to show us how to do it. And the 12 steps, of course, are those spiritual principles which are restated as steps of action, so that when we take the action of the steps, we in fact live a spiritual way of life. We practice these principles in all of our affairs. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. Now you see that the same rule applies to the family as does to we alcoholics when we first come in. Remember, we referred to this before, but in chapter 7, in talking about the newcomer, we're instructed that once we have given them the Big Book to read and they've expressed a desire to go further, that we're not to press them or push them or urge them. And it tells us why. That if they are to find God, the desire must come from within. And the same thing is true here of the families. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. There's a big amen to that, guys. Go right back to the third step prayer. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. In other words, let my actions speak. Let me be an example to the people I wish to help of God's power and His love and His way of life working in and through me, so that perhaps if they see the action I take, they see the way I live my life, perhaps they will want that too. And so we're going to teach, and we're going to bring the message by example, probably more than anything else. And with the family, we're in close contact with them. They're going to see the difference in the way we live our lives. And they will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. And it's also very good to keep in mind that if we wish to know about someone else, we need to watch what they do. Their words are going to be not nearly as convincing as their actions. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. And there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. That little innoxious sentence is a big one, because it's giving us the whole key to being set free from our guilt. Remember, we talked about this at the beginning of last hour, that the key here is the willingness to make amends if, as, and when we can do so. And that willingness is what will set us free. And it's phrased a little differently here. There's maybe some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. In other words, that we are honestly willing to make amends if we can. That is enough. Strange as it may seem, that is enough. Now, of course, there are actions that are taken all the way around this. And those actions are where we are demonstrating our willingness to make amends where we can. And so the ones we can't make, we will be relieved of the guilt if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would do so if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. And there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases. But we don't delay if it can be avoided. And by the way, in sending out these letters, sometimes we don't even have an address. But it's still a good idea to write the letter. We want to get this stuff out of our heads and down on paper. It's so important to do that. We write down in the letter exactly what we'd say if we had them in front of us. And by doing that, we demonstrate even further our willingness to make amends. Sometimes it's a really good idea where we have a tough amends to make to write the letter, even though we know we're going to talk to the person face to face. It helps us to organize what we wish to say. And to keep it in some kind of a reasonable amount of words, because we don't want amends to be some lengthy diatribe. We do not want to parade the horribles. We do not want to make people we've harmed have to relive the horrors of the past. We want to make sure that they understand that we're sincerely sorry for what we've done. We're going to make every effort not to ever repeat what we've done. And that we want to be able to say to them, what can I do to be helpful to you? That's the way we end every amends. What can I do to help you? Please remember that. What can I do to help you? There may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible tactful, considerate, and humble, without being servile or scraping. In other words, we are not to be kowtowing. We are not to be tugging at our forelocks. We're not to be on our knees or on our faces, crawling around. We're standing up, and we're facing the people we've harmed, and we're coming straight from our new spiritual position, our place of rebirth. If we have been the subservient person in the past, they're going to notice a major change in us. We are no longer being controlled by them or by our guilt. Because as God's people we stand on our feet, we don't crawl before anyone. We must not use that last sentence as an excuse for being aggressive, for exercising our supposed right to retaliate. No. All that means is exactly what it says. We stand on our own 2 feet, but we don't crawl around before anyone. Nobody controls us anymore, or for the rest of our lives. Nobody. And those who try, we treat with kindness and consideration. We say, that's interesting. And then we go ahead and do what we know we're supposed to do. We don't need their approval. We don't need their validation. We don't need them. Because it is that very neediness which has taken us in places, dark places, where we ought not ever to have been. We love them. And we express our love for them without need for anything in return. That's when it all comes back. And it's the only way it'll all come back. So let's go on. If we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. And that's true because in the 5th step, halfway through, we find all kinds of promises starting to materialize. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. Remember, our heritage is that we be happy, joyous, and free. Freedom from the bondage of self. Happiness that comes from the lack of guilt and remorse and shame. From a feeling that we are productive. From a feeling that we are successful. Not successful in outcome, but successful in our efforts. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Well, that's simple enough, isn't it? We've just made amends, and we're willing to make more. What does regret of the past mean to us anymore? The guilt, remorse, and shame is gone. It's taken from us. So you can see how that promise comes true. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. Comprehending the word, we will understand what serenity means because we have experienced it. Remember what Henry Ford said. He said, when I tell you something, you're interested. When you see it, you believe it. When you experience it, you understand it. Comprehend means to understand. And we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. See, that's the whole purpose here, isn't it, guys? We found out that the reason we're here is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's why we're here. That's our purpose. Bill called it our holy mission. The feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. Self-pity is the worst manifestation of self. It tears us apart, destroys us, and destroys all of our relationships at the same time. Nobody wants to sit around and listen to somebody whine, moan, wheeze, complain, mule, and puke. And we have to listen to that long enough and we say, stay away from me. Maybe we don't even say it, we just make sure that we stay away. Self-seeking will slip away. Self-seeking is the curse. Selfishness and self-centeredness, this has been the root of our troubles. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. That means that we've had that spiritual awakening. We've had that rebirth that it talks about back in the third step. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. I know that everything I knew when I got here was wrong. I'd start over again. And the strange part about it is, I've got a pretty good education and a fairly high IQ, but everything I know today, I learned here. And nothing is original. I haven't had original thought since I got here. It hasn't been necessary. This has all been done for me. All I've had to do is be willing to learn it. And to learn it through experience. And that experience has taught me that this stuff is all true. It's all inspired. I understand it. And that hasn't come as a result of somebody telling me I ought to understand it. It comes because I've done the work over the years. In 38 years, I've come to believe this stuff in total. I believe that the big book is divinely inspired. I believe that every word in it is true. And I believe that all the directions in the book are meant for me to follow. And I know that when I or anyone else takes these directions and follows them with a good heart, they always, invariably, without any exception, work. That's what I was telling a guy at the break. You do exactly what the book says, without dragging your feet, without excuses, and I promise you, you'll be just fine. Maybe for the first time in your life. And that's the truth. We will, our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Now, when you've done your fears list, you're going to realize that the fear of people is primarily fear of rejection or fear of confrontation. And of course, financial insecurity is a very big part of our fears list. And that's gone. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. That's because, as we learn over on page 85, we're going to develop this vital sixth sense, which puts us in the place where we, in fact, are able to discern what God's will is for us. Not always, but a lot of the time. And we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And boy, is that a big one. Because we already found out all the way back, starting with the first step, that there's much going on here over which we have absolutely no power. We might wish to be moral. We might wish to be ethical. We might wish to be the good person we've always wanted to be, but we don't know how to do it. We need God's help because we're powerless. Of course, the truth of the matter is every human being is without power, but most of them don't die over it. You just have a crappy life. There is one who has all power. That one is God. And every time we arrogate to ourselves the presumption that somehow or another we're capable of running our own lives, that's when we always get in trouble. That's why in the third step we ask God to take our life and our will into His hands. And then we proceed to do whatever it takes to surrender and to stay surrendered. Because we know that whether we like it or not, God's will is going to be done. We might just as well be in concert with it than run in contrary to it. That only makes common sense, doesn't it? So we have to do whatever it takes to put ourselves in that place. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. Why? Why are they not extravagant? Well, because they are being fulfilled among us. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Now, remember that the 5th chapter is how it works. The 6th chapter is into action. The 7th chapter is working with others. Anywhere in there do we see lying around on the sofa? Do we see anything about just go to meetings and don't drink? No. I went to a meeting last night down in the lower regions down there called, there must have been, I guess probably 50, 60 people at this meeting. And it was amazing. If they were serving liquor at the bar, it would be no different than Fridays. No different. It was all such a wonderful social occasion, and everybody was making their best efforts to be as attractive as possible. And I don't remember hearing anything about recovery. There may have been a few things said, but I didn't hear them. And I sometimes wonder, I'm not against parties. We're going to have a party here.